Hi, folks. So a lot of people have been asking me to provide a bit of background information on what's happening in Ukraine right now, and I thought I would do so for those who don't already know, and I'm going to try to keep this about as short as possible. So the story starts about 1,000 years ago. At that time, Kiev in Rus was actually the central hub of what would later become the Russian civilization. And that was physically in the site where Kiev is now today. Over time, the Russians and the Ukrainians sort of developed distinct identities, and the Ukrainians' identity was based on their proximity to Catholic Poland and to the rest of Europe. So they have a very similar language with a very similar script, and they have a similar version of Orthodox Christianity, but they became very different peoples. Now, during the Russian Empire, the Russians usually kept Ukraine first under control, and they also wanted to keep them ideologically associated with the Russian imperial project and with the great Russian people. And one of the reasons for this is that Ukrainians and Belarusians along with them represented about 22% of the population of the Russian Empire. So it was kind of demographically important for the Tsar to make sure that these people identified with the greater Russians and the Russian state rather than seeking independence for themselves. In the 1930s, Soviet policies created a terrible famine in Ukraine known as Holodomor. This was is usually blamed on Stalin by historians. Stalin was a guy who liked to basically persecute entire peoples for his personal vendettas, and Ukraine had rebelled against the center during the Russian Revolution, and this might have been Stalin's personal idea of revenge. In any case, this famine killed somewhere between 3 and 5 million people and was probably one of the greatest tragedies in Ukrainian history. This basically turned Ukrainian nationalist sentiment against the Russian rulers forever, and it's the basis of the antipathy that Ukrainians feel towards Russians today. So the territory of Ukraine, like that of Poland and Belarus, has transformed so many times over the past 100 years that it cannot be said to have any traditional shape, so to speak. During the time of the USSR, the Soviet Union never thought that it would fall apart and lose territories, and so it actually transferred several pieces of territory into the Ukrainian Republic. One of those is Crimea. Also, you have to think about demographics, because millions of Ukrainians were actually shipped out of Ukraine and spread across the empire, or the Soviet Empire, if you will, and millions of ethnic Russians who speak Russian were shipped in to settle in Ukraine. A lot of that was done under Stalin. They were absolutely widely distributed throughout Ukraine when it became independent in 1991, and the greatest concentration of ethnic Russians is in Crimea, and probably I think the second greatest concentration is in the eastern provinces. And it's no accident that these are the first places that the Russian Federation has occupied in modern times. West Ukraine is the traditional home of the nationalist Ukrainians who speak Ukrainian, and the traditional nationalist capital is Lviv in the west. So after 1991, when Ukraine attained independence, they naturally wanted to protect themselves against the Russians that had abused them, much like the Poles and much like the Baltic states, for example. They sought NATO membership. Now, the Russians, for their part, have had one geopolitical strategy with regard to Western Europe for about the past 500 years, and that is control as much of the steppe reaches to Moscow as possible. And the reason for that is that's where the invaders always come. The Polish did it, the French did it under Napoleon, and the Germans did it twice. So Russia is always trying to control pieces of land that are on the steppe approaches to Moscow, because they need these states as buffers, because they see their position as geostrategically weak if there are foreign arms and foreign armies that are, closer and closer to Moscow. And so what's going on today then has two basic aspects. The first is Putin and the Russian establishment do not want arms and armies and NATO bases anywhere nearer to Moscow than they absolutely have to be. And they would like that to be farther in Europe, farther west of Ukraine if possible. And the second thing that's going on is that Putin, of course, sees himself as a great author of Russia's destiny, and he would like to unite the Russians, the ethnic Russians and the Russian speakers that have been left outside of the Soviet Union after its fall. He would like to unite those with the greater Russian Federation of today. So I can't really give a good prediction on how far this is going to go, how far Putin will go. I know that in the war he fought with Georgia in 2008, he took the two regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, which he ended up occupying and which ended up breaking off with Georgia. But then he pushed much farther into the country, and it looks like he did that just in order to be able to sign a peace treaty and give it back and retain control of the places that he had occupied. So I don't know what's going to happen in the case of Ukraine. Really, it's all up in the air. We'll just have to see how things go. The second question is why now? And I am not sure if I can give a very good answer to that question. One of the reasons is I believe that Putin probably wouldn't do this to Trump. So doing it to the Biden administration, which is staffed with people who are very hostile towards Moscow from the Obama administration, that might be one of the reasons he's chosen to do this now. And the other interesting answer to why now is he started on February 24th. February 23rd in Russia is the Heroic Defenders of the Fatherland's Day. It's kind of like the male component of Women's Day. So, in Women's Day, a lot of men go to women and they give them a flower and they say, Happy Women's Day. And on this holiday, women usually give some sort of nationalist postcard to men and say, thank you for your manly defense of the fatherland. So that day was allowed to pass on February 23rd, and then on February 24th, the invasion began. So several weeks ago, both Biden and Boris Johnson swore that they would not send any actual troops to Ukraine. And right now, of course, the West is clamoring and considering whether or not this is the right decision. And I'm going to let the viewer make up their own mind, but one thing that I would like to add is that I am very doubtful that any country in the world could actually oppose Russia militarily in Ukraine. It is on Russia's doorstep. It has the shortest supply lines that you could ask for in any war, and all of the troops that are on Russia's side see this as national self-defense, and that this is something they are doing to ensure that NATO does not put bases and missiles within a very, very short range of Moscow. Now, if Western powers were to intervene in a conventional war, they would have to have hugely long supply lines, and they would have to have the disadvantages that come with the coordination among allies. And so it's very, very hard for me to see how anyone would even be capable of waging a conventional war against Russia in Ukraine and seriously winning. Now, if we're not talking about conventional troops, then the only way to win against Russia would be to use nuclear weapons. I'm fairly sure that no one in the world wants that to happen, and Putin has indicated in a vague way that he might be willing to use nuclear weapons against the West if it happens to intervene. So I'm really hoping that that is off the table for all of the leaders in question. All right, folks, so that's it for my informational summary. And beyond that, all I'd like to say is that I really hope all of my friends and their families in Ukraine are safe, and that this will pass and the war will stop as quickly as possible.